The maid sat in the pouring rain, eating scraps and crying over debt she'd never escape. The Mafia boss found her there, soaked and breaking. What he didn't know, the debt was fake and the enemy had been inside his house all along. Lorenzo De Luca wasn't supposed to be home that night. The meeting with the Castellano family had dragged on for 6 hours, 3 hours of polite conversation over expensive whiskey, 3 hours of veiled threats and carefully chosen words. By the time Lorenzo's black Mercedes pulled through the iron gates of his estate in upstate New York, it was past midnight, and the storm that had been threatening all evening had finally broken loose. Rain hammered the windshield like bullets. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, shaking the ancient oak trees that lined the long driveway. Lorenzo's driver, Tommy, navigated the slick road carefully, the mansion's lights barely visible through the downpour. "Hell of a night, boss," Tommy muttered. Lorenzo didn't respond. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight. The Castellanos wanted a piece of a shipping operation, had the audacity to suggest a partnership that sounded more like a hostile takeover. He'd smiled, shaken hands, and promised to think about it, but both sides knew what that meant. War was coming. It always did. The car stopped at the main entrance. Tommy moved to open an umbrella, but Lorenzo waved him off. "Go home. Your wife's probably worried sick." "You sure, Mr. De Luca?" "I'm sure. See you tomorrow." Tommy nodded and drove off toward the garage. Lorenzo stood in the rain for a moment, letting the cold water soak through his expensive suit jacket. Sometimes the rain felt cleansing, like it could wash away the blood and lies that came with his line of work. He was about to head inside when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a shadow, something his tired eyes had conjured. But as lightning flashed across the sky, he saw her clearly, a figure sitting on the stone steps of the side balcony, hunched over, completely soaked. Lorenzo's hand instinctively moved to the gun at his waist. Security breach. Had to be. Nobody sat outside in a storm like this unless they were watching, waiting, planning something. He approached silently, his footsteps masked by the rain. But as he got closer, he realized 2 things. First, the figure was small, far too small to be one of Castellano's men. Second, she was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Quiet tears that mixed with the rain on her face. "Clara?" The young woman's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. She scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping the piece of bread she'd been holding. "Mr. De Luca. I'm sorry, I wasn't." Clara Moretti. She'd been working at the mansion for 8 months. Quiet girl, maybe 23 or 24. Always kept her head down, did her work without complaint. Lorenzo knew her name because he made it his business to know everyone in his house, but he'd never really looked at her before. Now he did. Her uniform was drenched, clinging to her thin frame. Her dark hair stuck to her face in wet strands. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue. And in her hand was a crust of bread, the kind the kitchen usually threw out for the birds. "What are you doing out here?" Lorenzo's voice was harder than he intended. "I was just..." Clara's voice cracked. She wiped at her eyes quickly, as if she could hide the tears. "I was taking a break. I'm sorry. I'll go back inside." She moved to pass him, but Lorenzo stepped into her path. Up close, he could see how exhausted she looked. Dark circles under her eyes. Cheeks hollow. When was the last time this girl had eaten a real meal? "You're eating bread." In a storm, it wasn't a question. Clara's eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm not very hungry anyway." Lightning flashed again, and Lorenzo noticed something else. A tray of food sitting just inside the balcony door. Untouched. The dinner his housekeeper had left for him. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh rolls. "There's a full meal sitting right there," he said, gesturing toward the tray. "That's yours, sir. I'm not going to eat it." "Still, it's not mine to take." Something in her voice, the quiet dignity, the stubborn pride, made Lorenzo pause. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, Years ago, when he was a kid in Brooklyn eating day-old pizza his mother had brought home from the restaurant where she worked double shifts.
Sit down, he said.
Sir?
Seat.
Down. Clara hesitated, then slowly sank back onto the wet steps. Lorenzo surprised himself by sitting beside her, ignoring the rain that continued to pour down. His $8,000 suit was already ruined anyway. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lorenzo asked, "Why are you really out here, Clara?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible over the storm. "I send most of my paycheck to my mother.
She's sick.
Needs medication. The bills they're a lot. So I try to save money where I can. I eat less. Work more hours when they're available," she laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Stupid, right? Working in a house full of food and going hungry. Lorenzo felt something twist in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation. Anger, but not at her. That's not stupid. That's loyalty. My mom, she raised me alone after my dad died. Worked 3 jobs to keep me in school. I owe her everything. Clara's voice broke. But I'm trying, Mr. DeLuca. I really am. I just can't seem to catch up. Lorenzo stood abruptly. Clara flinched, as if expecting to be dismissed, fired, thrown out into the rain. Instead, he picked up the dinner tray and held it out to her.
Eat.
I can't. It's not a request, Clara. It's an order. Their eyes met. Hers were brown, he noticed. Warm brown, despite the fear in them. After a moment, she took the tray with shaking hands. Thank you, she whispered. Lorenzo nodded and turned to walk away. But he paused at the door, looking back at the small figure huddled on the steps, finally eating real food. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Clara wasn't the only staff member in this house. Why was she the one going hungry? Clara, he said. How much do I pay you? She told him the number. It was exactly what Lorenzo had authorized 8 months ago. Fair wages for fair work. So where's the money going? And you've never received more than that? No bonuses, no adjustments. Clara shook her head. Actually, sir, there have been some deductions. For maintenance, I think. Broken dishes, that kind of thing. It's in the contract. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. What contract? But he already knew. There shouldn't be any contract like that. He'd never authorized deductions for broken dishes. Someone was skimming money from his staff, and they were using his name to do it. Thunder crashed overhead as Lorenzo stepped into the mansion, water dripping from his clothes. His mind was already working, calculating, planning. Someone in his house was stealing. And Lorenzo DeLuca did not tolerate thieves. Lorenzo stood in his private office, water still dripping from his hair onto the Persian rug beneath his feet. He should have changed into dry clothes. Should have poured himself a drink and called it a night. But his mind kept circling back to Clara's words. Deductions for maintenance. He moved to his desk and unlocked the bottom drawer, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. Everything important in Lorenzo's world existed in 2 places: the digital files his account maintained, and these handwritten records he kept himself. In his line of work, you never trusted computers completely. Technology could be hacked, manipulated, erased. But ink on paper? That told the truth. He flipped to the staff payroll section. His household employed 23 people: housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, security, drivers. Lorenzo paid them well, better than most legitimate businesses, certainly better than other families in his world. Loyalty was expensive, but betrayal cost more. His finger traced down the columns. Each entry showed the authorized salary, the payment date, and any adjustments. For most employees, the numbers were clean. Salary in, salary out. Simple. Then he found Clara's name. Clara Moretti. Base salary, $2,400 per month. Standard rate for household staff. But underneath in smaller print. Maintenance deduction, $300. Equipment replacement, $150. Cleaning supply damage, $200.
His jaw tightened.
That was $650 in deductions, more than a quarter of her salary. And the notations continued across 3 separate pay periods. In the past 3 months alone, Clara had lost nearly $2,000 to these mysterious fines. Lorenzo grabbed a legal pad and began making notes. His handwriting was neat, precise, habits from his childhood when his mother insisted he do his homework properly, even when they barely had money for pencils. He turned the page and checked the other staff members. Maria Santos, head housekeeper, 2 maintenance deductions. $400 total. David Chun, gardener, 3 deductions. $500 total. Roberto Fuentes, night security, 1 deduction. $150. The pattern emerged slowly, like a picture coming into focus. 12 employees out of 23 had these deductions. Always labeled maintenance or damages or equipment loss, always in amounts between $100 and $300. Small enough not to trigger immediate suspicion. Large enough to add up. Lorenzo did the math. Over the past 6 months, approximately $8,000 had been deducted from his staff's wages. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The interesting part wasn't the theft. Money got stolen every day in his world. The interesting part was the method. This wasn't someone grabbing cash from a safe or skimming off the top of a drug deal. This was surgical. Calculated. Someone who understood that the best way to steal wasn't to take a lot from one person, but to take a little from many people. Someone smart. Lorenzo opened his laptop and pulled up the digital payroll records that his accountant, Vitor Russo, maintained. Vitor had been with him for 5 years. Came recommended by the Genovese family. Handled all the legitimate business finances. The restaurants, the real estate holdings, the import companies that served as fronts for less legitimate operations. The digital records matched his ledger perfectly. Every deduction was there, properly documented, with dates and explanations. On paper, everything looked legitimate. But Lorenzo hadn't authorized any of these deductions. He would have remembered. He remembered everything. He pulled up Clara's employment contract. It was standard, salary, hours, benefits, terms of employment. He scrolled to the fine print at the bottom.
There.
Employee agrees to reimburse employer for any damages to property, equipment, or supplies caused by negligence or carelessness. Deductions will be made from regular salary as needed. Lorenzo read it twice. This clause hadn't been in the contracts he'd approved. He specifically remembered removing similar language 2 years ago after one of his lawyers suggested it. He'd said no. His staff worked hard. They shouldn't live in fear of making a mistake. Someone had added it back. Without his permission. He opened his desk drawer again and pulled out his personal notebook, a small black moleskine he carried everywhere. This wasn't for business. This was for the questions that kept him awake at night. The details that didn't quite fit. The loose threads that, when pulled, unraveled entire operations. Lorenzo uncapped his pen and wrote in neat capital letters. Who profits from hunger? Underneath, he began a list. 1. Vitor Russo, accountant, manages all payroll. 2. Mrs. Patterson, head of household, hires staff. 3. Unknown. Who else has access to contracts? He tapped the pen against his lips, thinking. Vitor was the obvious suspect. He had access, opportunity, and the financial knowledge to pull this off. But something felt wrong about it being that simple. Vitor made 6 figures managing Lorenzo's books. Why risk everything for $8,000? Unless it wasn't about the money. Lorenzo's phone buzzed. A text from Marco, his tech chief and closest friend since childhood. Meeting went bad with Castellanos. Lorenzo typed back, as expected. We'll talk tomorrow. Marco, need me to start moving assets. Lorenzo stared at the message. Moving assets meant preparing for war, liquidating vulnerable holdings, securing weapons, calling in favors. The usual dance when families went to war. But Lorenzo's mind was elsewhere. He typed, not yet. Need you to look into something else first. Our internal payroll system. Quietly. There was a pause. Then, problems. Maybe. Come by the house tomorrow morning. Early.
Done.
Lorenzo set the phone down and returned to his notebook. He drew a line connecting Clara's name to the deductions, then another line to Vitor's name. But he left space. Space for other names he didn't know yet. Other connections he hadn't found. In his world, revenge was usually swift and brutal. Someone stole from you. You made an example of them. Quick, public, violent. But Lorenzo had learned long ago that the best revenge was patient. You watched. You waited. You gathered every piece of evidence until the picture was complete. Then you struck. He looked at his watch. 1:47 nachts. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady rain. Somewhere in this house, Clara was probably asleep, her stomach finally full. Tomorrow she'd wake up and go back to work, never knowing that her boss had spent the night hunting for whoever was stealing her future. Lorenzo wrote one more line in his notebook. Let them think I don't know. A thief who feels safe steals more. Then he closed the book, turned off the light, and sat in the darkness, listening to the rain and planning his next move. Lorenzo de Luca became a ghost in his own house. For the next 4 days, he watched. Not overtly. He'd built an empire on the ability to observe without being observed. He adjusted his routine, took breakfast in the smaller dining room instead of his office, walked the halls at odd hours. To his staff, it probably seemed like nothing. Just the boss being unpredictable. But Lorenzo was hunting. Clara arrived every morning at 6:30, a full hour before her shift officially started. Lorenzo watched from the second-floor window as she walked up the long driveway, her thin jacket inadequate against the early November cold. She never took the staff shuttle that picked up the other household employees. Walking saved money, he realized. The shuttle cost $5 each way. On the second day of his observation, he noticed the limp. It was subtle. Clara was good at hiding it. But when she thought no one was looking, her left leg dragged slightly. By afternoon, after hours of climbing stairs and carrying laundry, she'd pause at the top of the main staircase, gripping the banister, her face tight with pain. Lorenzo called Mrs. Patterson, his head of household, into his office. Clara Moretti, he said without preamble. Is she injured? Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 60s who'd been managing his household for a decade, frowned. Not that I'm aware of, Mr. DeLuca. Is there a problem with her work?
Her work is fine.
I want to know about her leg. Her leg. She's limping. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted, just a flicker of something.
Concern?
Guilt?
I hadn't noticed.
I'll speak with her. No, Lorenzo said sharply. Don't speak with her. Just tell me, have there been any workplace injuries reported? None, sir. Lorenzo dismissed her with a wave. After she left, he made another note in his black notebook. Mrs. P either doesn't notice or doesn't care. Which? That afternoon, Lorenzo found himself in the kitchen around 3 o'clock, the time when Clara usually took her 15-minute break. He pretended to discuss the evening menu with Chef Antoine, but he was watching Clara through the doorway. She sat alone at the small staff table in the back hallway, rubbing her left knee. Her face was pale, drawn. She pulled out a small bottle of generic pain medication from her pocket, shook out 2 pills, and swallowed them dry. Then she stood, tested the leg, winced, and went back to work.
No complaint.
No request for help. Just silent endurance. Lorenzo felt that unfamiliar twist in his chest again. Anger. But also something else. Something that reminded him of his mother, who'd worked herself into an early grave rather than ask anyone for help. That evening, Lorenzo made a call to his personal physician, Dr. Sarah Chen. I need a heating pad, professional grade, he said. And a knee brace. The good kind, not drugstore garbage. Are you hurt? Sarah asked, concerned. They're not for me, Lorenzo. Can you get them or not? I can have them delivered tomorrow, tonight. There was a pause. I'll bring them myself within the hour. When the items arrived, Lorenzo waited until the house grew quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. Only Clara remained, finishing the evening cleaning. He checked the schedule. She'd volunteered for overtime again. Of course she had. Lorenzo placed the heating pad and knee brace on the small table in the staff break room, along with a bottle of prescription-strength pain medication. He left no note.
No explanation.
Then he went to his study and waited. 20 minutes later, he heard Clara's soft gasp of surprise. Through the cracked door, he watched her discover the items. She looked around the empty hallway, confusion written on her face. Someone must have left these, she whispered to herself, running her fingers over the knee brace. Maybe Dr. Chen forgot them? She started to walk away, then stopped, looked back. Her hand reached out, touched the heating pad, then withdrew. It's not mine, she said to the empty room. I can't. But Lorenzo saw the longing in her eyes, the way she shifted weight off her bad leg, the exhaustion. She left the items untouched. Lorenzo waited until she moved to another part of the house, then called out, Clara, could you come here for a moment? She appeared in his study doorway, wiping her hands on her apron nervously. Yes, Mr. DeLuca? I'm expecting some medical supplies to be delivered for Mrs. Patterson. If you see anything in the break room, make sure it gets to her, would you? Clara blinked. Medical supplies, sir? For her knee. She mentioned it was bothering her. The lie came smoothly. I can never remember where her quarters are. Just leave them outside her door. Of course, sir. I'll take care of it. Good. And Clara? You've been working a lot of overtime lately. Take Friday off. Paid. Sir, I don't need. It wasn't a request. She nodded, eyes downcast, and left. The next morning, Lorenzo spotted Clara walking without a limp. She thought she was using Mrs. Patterson's medical supplies. Mrs. Patterson, when Lorenzo later invented a casual question about her health, had no idea what he was talking about but was too professional to question her employer's odd behavior. On Wednesday, Lorenzo noticed Clara eating the same crust of bread for lunch. He arranged for a staff appreciation lunch from Antoine. Individual meals left at each employee's station. Clara found hers with a note in Mrs. Patterson's forged handwriting, for excellent work this week. She smiled, actually smiled, and ate every bite. Thursday brought rain again. Lorenzo had a fresh umbrella delivered to the staff room, hung it on Clara's designated hook. This time, when she found it, she looked around with wonder. Someone's umbrella, she murmured, examining the price tag he'd deliberately left on. They must have dropped it. I'll turn it into lost and found tonight. But when the rain started and she had to walk home, she used it. Lorenzo watched from his window as she made her way down the driveway, protected from the storm for once. He told himself this was just practical. A sick employee was an inefficient employee. Making sure Clara was healthy was just good business. But late that night, sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey, Lorenzo admitted the truth to himself. Somewhere between finding her crying in the rain and watching her smile over a simple meal, Clara Moretti had stopped being just another employee. She'd become someone he wanted to protect. And that was dangerous for both of them. Marco Santoro arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 coffees and a laptop bag. He'd been Lorenzo's friend since they were 12 years old, running numbers for neighborhood bookies in Brooklyn. Now Marco ran a legitimate cybersecurity firm that served as cover for less legitimate digital operations. You look like hell, Marco said, handing Lorenzo a coffee. Didn't sleep much. Lorenzo led him to the study and locked the door behind them. I need you to look at something. Our payroll system. Marco's eyebrows rose. Someone skimming? Maybe. But I need to know for sure before I make accusations. Lorenzo pulled out his ledger and showed Marco the deductions. These shouldn't exist. I never authorized them. Marco studied the numbers, his expression growing darker. How long has this been going on? At least 6 months. Could be longer. And Vitor handles all the payroll processing? Every cent that goes in or out of this house passes through him first. Marco set down his coffee and opened his laptop. Give me access to your network. For the next 3 hours, Lorenzo watched his friend work. Marco's fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code scrolling down the screen faster than Lorenzo could read. Occasionally Marco would mutter something in Italian, usually a curse word. Okay, Marco finally said, leaning back in his chair. Your payroll system routes through 3 different accounts before money reaches your staff. Standard practice for legitimate businesses. Helps with tax documentation, record keeping, all that boring stuff. And there's a 4th account in the chain that shouldn't be there. Marco turned the laptop so Lorenzo could see. Look here. Every time there's a maintenance deduction, the money doesn't go back into your operating account like it should. It routes to this. He pointed to a string of numbers on the screen. Account number 847-29446-003. Registered to a company called Alpine Facility Services. Lorenzo frowned. Never heard of it. That's because it doesn't exist. Well, it exists on paper, registered in Delaware, which is a red flag right there. Delaware is where you set up a shell company when you don't want people asking questions. Marco pulled up another window. Alpine Facility Services. Registered 3 years ago. Lists its business as facility management and maintenance consultation. No website. No employees. No physical address except a P.O. box. A ghost. Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Marco's fingers danced across the keyboard again. I traced the bank account. Every month, Alpine receives deposits from 23 different sources. Want to guess what they are? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Families like mine. Ding, ding, ding. The Castellanos, the Russos, the Genovese outfit, even some of the Chicago crews. All of them have similar maintenance deduction programs running through their household payroll. The amounts are small, few hundred here, few thousand there. Spread across dozens of employees in each organization. Lorenzo stood and walked to the window, processing. How much total? Conservatively, Alpine's pulling in about $40,000 a month. $500,000 a year. The number hung in the air. Not huge money in Lorenzo's world. He'd seen single drug shipments worth 10 times that. But this wasn't about drugs or gambling or protection rackets. This was about stealing from people who could barely afford to eat. Who owns Alpine? Lorenzo asked quietly.
Marco Gesetati.
That's where it gets complicated. The ownership is buried under 3 layers of holding companies. But I traced the actual bank transactions. Guess whose signature is on the Alpine account authorization? Vittor.
Close.
The signature belongs to Antonio Moretti. Lorenzo turned sharply. Moretti?
Yeah.
Any relation to your maid Clara Moretti? Lorenzo felt ice in his veins. Her father died years ago. That's what she told me. Marco pulled up a death certificate on screen. Antonio Moretti. Died 8 years ago. Heart attack, he paused. But his signature is on documents dated 6 months ago. Someone's using a dead man's identity. Vittor, Lorenzo said with certainty now. He needed a name that wouldn't trace back to him. Found a dead man with the right last name and borrowed it.
Probably.
But here's the really sick part. Marco opened another file. I dug into Clara's background. Her father didn't die of a heart attack. He was murdered, shot outside a restaurant in Queens. Know who owned that restaurant? Lorenzo already knew. The Castellanos. Bingo. Antonio Moretti worked as an accountant for the Castellano family. Rumor was he found some irregularities in their books, threatened to go to the feds. 2 days later, he's dead. Case never solved. Lorenzo's mind raced, connecting pieces. So Vittor is using a dead accountant's name, a dead accountant who was killed for finding financial crimes. That's either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant. Or incredibly connected, Marco said quietly. Lorenzo, whoever's running this operation has access to financial systems across multiple crime families. That takes serious backing. This isn't just Vittor being greedy. This is organized. Lorenzo returned to his desk and opened his black notebook. He wrote, Alpine Facility Services. Shell Company. Vittor Plus? Partners. Can you trace where the money goes after Alpine? He asked. Working on it. The funds get moved quickly, usually within 48 hours of deposit. They bounced through offshore accounts, cryptocurrency conversions, the whole 9 yards. Professional money laundering. Marco closed his laptop. But I'll find it. Give me a few days. You have too. Marco nodded, understanding the urgency. What are you going to do about Vitor? Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. Every instinct told him to confront his accountant immediately. Demand answers. Make an example. But something held him back. Nothing, he finally said. Nothing. If Vitor's working with someone bigger, I want to know who before I make a move. Right now, he thinks he's safe. Let's keep it that way. Lorenzo met his friend's eyes. A thief with confidence steals more. And the more he steals, the more evidence we collect. Marco grinned, the same wild grin he'd had as a kid when they were planning their first con. You're going to let him hang himself.
Exactly.
But Marco. Lorenzo's voice dropped, turning cold. When we finally pull the rope, I want everyone attached to it. Every person who thought they could steal from people like Clara. Understood. Understood. After Marco left, Lorenzo sat alone in his study. Through the window, he could see Clara arriving for work, right on time, using the umbrella he'd left for her. She was smiling slightly, probably thinking about whatever kind stranger kept leaving her gifts. She had no idea her father's name was being used to fund her own exploitation. Lorenzo picked up his pen and added one more line to his notebook. Someone's going to pay for this. With interest. Marco called at 2 a.m. the next night. Lorenzo was still awake, reading through old shipping manifests in his study. Insomnia had become his constant companion. Found something, Marco said without greeting. You're not going to like it.
I'm listening.
Alpine Facility Services is owned by another shell company called North Point Holdings. North Point is owned by Triton Logistics Group. And Triton. Marco paused for effect. Triton is a legitimate shipping company based in New Jersey. Guess who owns 40% of Triton? Lorenzo's grip tightened on the phone. Tell me. Vincent Moretti. The name hit Lorenzo like a punch to the gut.
Vincent Moretti.
Head of the Moretti Syndicate, one of the most ruthless families operating between New York and Philadelphia. They'd been circling Lorenzo's territory for 2 years, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses. You're sure? Lorenzo asked, though he knew Marco never called unless he was certain. Positive. I pulled the corporate filings. Vincent owns it through his nephew, Danny Moretti, who runs the day-to-day operations. Triton Logistics is their main legitimate front. They use it to move everything from furniture to firearms. Lorenzo stood and walked to his wall map, studying the network of territories and operations. Red pins marked his holdings. Blue pins marked the Morettis. Over the past 6 months, 3 of his red pins had disappeared. Operations that had mysteriously fallen apart, warehouses that burned down, shipments that got intercepted. How long has Triton owned Alpine? Lorenzo asked. 3 years. Right around the time you expanded into the Port Newark operations. The same port where Triton has their main shipping hub. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The Morettis weren't just stealing from his household staff. They were systematically bleeding his entire organization, along with every other family stupid enough not to notice. Small amounts. Invisible amounts. Death by 1,000 cuts. There's more, Marco continued. Remember those shipping delays you had last month? The containers that got randomly selected for inspection? The ones that cost me $200,000 in spoiled product?
Yeah, those.
Guess which logistics company filed the anonymous tip with customs? Triton. Give the man a prize. And those 3 warehouses that had electrical fires in the past 6 months? All of them were insured through Apex Insurance Group, another Moretti holding company. Lorenzo closed his eyes, fighting the rage building in his chest. The Morettis had been inside his organization for years, like termites eating away at the foundation. The payroll scheme was just one piece of a much larger operation. How much have they taken from me total? Lorenzo asked quietly, the dangerous kind of quiet. Marco was silent for a moment. If I count the payroll theft, the sabotaged shipments, the insurance fraud, the stolen contracts. Conservatively? $3 million over 2 years. $3 million. And Lorenzo had been so focused on external threats, the Castellanos, the Russian crews pushing into his territory, that he'd missed the enemy already inside his walls. They're smart, Marco added. Everything's designed to look like bad luck or honest mistakes. A fire here, a delay there, some employee deductions that seem legitimate. Individually, none of it raises red flags. But together. It's warfare, Lorenzo finished. Economic warfare.
Exactly.
They're weakening you financially before they make their real move. When you're cash poor and dealing with internal problems, that's when they'll strike hard. Probably try to take your port operations, maybe your legitimate businesses too. Lorenzo returned to his desk and opened his black notebook. He wrote Moretti Syndicate in capital letters and underlined it 3 times. We need to hit them now, Marco said, his voice hard. Hit them fast and hit them hard. Take out Triton's warehouses, freeze their accounts, put Vincent Moretti in the ground before.
No.
What? We do nothing. Marco's disbelief crackled through the phone. Lorenzo, they've stolen $3 million from you. They're using a dead man's name, a man they probably killed, to fund operations against multiple families. They're planning something big. And you want to do nothing? Lorenzo understood his friend's anger. Every instinct screamed for immediate retaliation. In their world, showing weakness invited destruction. But Lorenzo had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't quick, it was absolute. Listen to me carefully, Lorenzo said. Right now, the Morettis think they're winning. They think I'm too stupid or too distracted to notice. That confidence? That's our weapon. I don't follow. A thief who feels safe steals more. The more they steal, the bolder they get. The bolder they get, the more evidence we collect. Lorenzo stared at his map, at all those blue pins marking Moretti territory. Right now we have proof of payroll fraud and some suspicious shipment issues. That's not enough to bring down an entire syndicate. But if we let them continue, if we let them think they're untouchable, they'll overreach, Marco said slowly, understanding dawning. They'll get greedy.
Exactly.
Vincent Moretti has been careful for 2 years. Small moves, plausible deniability. But if he thinks his plan is working, he'll accelerate, make bigger moves. And bigger moves leave bigger evidence. That's risky, Lorenzo. Every day we wait, they're stealing from you, weakening you. Let them think I'm weak. Let them think I'm bleeding out. Lorenzo's voice turned cold as winter steel. Because when I finally strike, I don't want to just win. I want to erase them. Every account, every operation, every member of the Moretti family who thought they could take what's mine. I want them destroyed so completely that 10 years from now, people will tell stories about what happens when you steal from Lorenzo De Luca. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're not just planning revenge. You're planning an execution. I'm planning justice. There's a difference. Lorenzo thought of Clara, eating bread in the rain while the Morettis used her dead father's name to get rich. Keep monitoring their accounts. Track every transaction. I want to know every move they make before they make it. What about Vitor? Leave him alone. He's the bait. As long as he's comfortable, he'll keep feeding information to the Morettis. And every piece of information he passes is another nail in their coffin. And if the Morettis move against you before you're ready? Lorenzo smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then we'll adapt. But Marco? Start moving our most valuable assets to secure locations. Quietly. I want our real money protected before this goes hot. Consider it done. After hanging up, Lorenzo stood at his window, watching the sunrise paint the sky red. Somewhere in New Jersey, Vincent Moretti was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his brilliant plan to slowly destroy the De Luca family. Let him sleep. Let him dream. Because when Lorenzo finally made his move, he wanted Vincent Moretti wide awake to see everything he'd built burn to ash. Clara arrived late to work on Friday morning, which was unusual. Lorenzo noticed because he'd begun timing her arrival with disturbing precision. 6:32 a.m. instead of her usual 6:30. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking as she hung up her jacket. Something had happened. Lorenzo didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead, he watched from the second-floor hallway as she went about her morning tasks. Her movements were mechanical, distracted. Twice he saw her pause to wipe at her eyes. Once, while dusting the main staircase, she sat down on a step and put her head in her hands. Mrs. Patterson found her there. "Clara? Are you ill?" Clara stood quickly, smoothing her uniform.
No, ma'am. I'm fine.
"Just tired. You don't look fine."
I'm okay.
Really, but her voice cracked on the last word. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Take your break early. Go sit down for a few minutes." Clara nodded and headed toward the staff break room. As she walked past the hall table, something fell from her apron pocket, a white envelope. She didn't notice. She just kept walking, shoulders hunched, looking like she carried the weight of the world. Lorenzo waited until she disappeared around the corner, then descended the stairs. The envelope lay face down on the marble floor. He picked it up. His blood went cold. The return address was printed in neat letters: Moretti Medical Solutions, Newark, New Jersey. Moretti. Lorenzo's hand tightened on the envelope. It was already open, so he pulled out the letter inside. His eyes scanned the text rapidly. Final notice of outstanding debt. Dear Ms. Clara Moretti, this letter serves as final notification that payment for services rendered to Patricia Moretti, account #M47823, is now 90 days past due. The outstanding balance of $47,500 must be paid in full within 14 days to avoid legal action. Services included: emergency cardiac care, $18,000, extended hospital stay, $22,500, medication and treatment, $7,000. Failure to remit payment will result in referral to collections agency, legal action including wage garnishment, reporting to credit bureaus. We understand medical debt can be overwhelming. However, your mother signed a payment agreement accepting full financial responsibility. As her listed emergency contact and co-signer, you are legally obligated to fulfill this debt. Please contact our billing department immediately to arrange payment. Sincerely, Robert Chin, Director of Financial Services, Moretti Medical Solutions. Lorenzo read it twice. Then he turned the envelope over and examined it carefully. There, in the bottom corner, barely visible, a small logo. A trident. The symbol of Triton Logistics. The Moretti Syndicate's mark. They'd printed it so faintly that most people would never notice. But Lorenzo knew what to look for now. He pulled out his phone and texted Marco, "Need you to research Moretti Medical Solutions. Newark address.
Now."
The response came within seconds. On it. Lorenzo walked to his study and searched for the company online. The website looked legitimate. Professional photos of smiling doctors and nurses, testimonials from satisfied patients, an impressive list of services. But when he clicked on the About Us page, the details were vague. Generic stock photos. No specific doctor names. No actual address beyond a P.O. box. His phone buzzed. Marco, Moretti Medical Solutions. Registered 8 months ago. Same ownership structure as Alpine, shell company owned by Triton. No actual medical facility exists at that address. It's a vacant office building. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. 8 months. The same time Clara started working for him. The same time the payroll deductions began. Another text from Marco found 23 similar companies, all using the Moretti name. Medical billing, student loan servicing, utility services. All fake. All targeting people who work for families in our world. Lorenzo understood now. It was brilliant in its cruelty. The Morettis weren't just stealing through payroll deductions. They were targeting the families of employees, using fake companies to create fraudulent debt. People like Clara, who were already struggling, suddenly found themselves drowning in fake medical bills, fake student loans, fake utility charges. And because the employees worked for crime families, they never went to the police. They suffered in silence, exactly as the Morettis planned. Lorenzo looked at the letter again. $47,000. Money Clara would never have. Money she'd spent her whole life trying to repay. To a company that didn't exist. For services her mother probably never received. He thought back to that night in the rain. I send most of my pay to my mother. She needs medicine. The medicine was probably real. But these bills? This debt? It was manufactured. A trap designed to keep Clara desperate, compliant, silent. The Morettis had studied her, found her weakness, her love for her mother, and weaponized it. Lorenzo walked to the break room. Clara sat at the small table, head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She didn't hear him approach. Clara. She jumped, hastily wiping her eyes. Mr. DeLuca, I'm sorry. I was just... You dropped this, he held out the envelope. Her face went white. She took it with trembling hands. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have brought personal mail to work. What is it? Nothing. Just a bill. Clara, his voice was gentle but firm. What kind of bill? She looked down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My mother had a heart attack 6 months ago. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I thought her insurance would cover it, but she held up the letter. They say we owe almost $50,000. They say she signed a payment agreement, but I don't remember that. I don't understand how the bill got so high. Let me see it. Sir, you don't have to. Let me see it, Clara. She handed him the letter reluctantly. He pretended to read it for the first time, letting his anger build behind a mask of concern. Moretti Medical Solutions, he said carefully. Is that where she was treated? I think so. Everything happened so fast. I just remember the ambulance, and then she was in the hospital, and the doctors said she'd be okay if she took her medication. Clara's voice broke. I've been sending them every penny I can spare, but it's not enough. They're threatening to sue. To garnish my wages. I don't know what to do. Lorenzo looked at this young woman who'd been working herself to exhaustion, going hungry, walking miles in the rain to save money, all to pay a debt that didn't exist. To repay people who deliberately targeted her because her last name was Moretti and her father was dead. How much have you paid them so far? He asked quietly. About $6,000. Over 6 months.
$6,000.
Money she didn't have. Money stolen from her through fear and lies. Lorenzo folded the letter and handed it back to her. Don't pay them anything else. But sir, they'll sue. Clara listened to me very carefully. Do not send them another penny. Do you understand? She looked confused, frightened. But the debt. I'll handle it. Trust me. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you, he met her eyes. You've worked for me for 8 months. In that time, have I ever lied to you? No, sir. Then trust me now. Don't contact them. Don't pay them. And if they contact you again, bring the letter directly to me.
Can you do that?
Clara nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Why are you helping me? Lorenzo thought about all the possible answers. Because it was good business. Because he needed loyal employees. Because it was the right thing to do. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any of those. Because someone should have helped you a long time ago, he said quietly. Now go home. Take the rest of the day off. Paid. After she left, Lorenzo returned to study and added a new line to his notebook. They're not just stealing money. They're stealing hope. That ends now. Lorenzo scheduled the meeting for Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. He made it sound routine, a quarterly review of household expenses, nothing more. Vitor Russo confirmed his attendance, without hesitation. That confidence told Lorenzo everything he needed to know. A guilty man would be nervous. An innocent man would be curious. But a man who thought he was untouchable? That man showed up relaxed, ready to dazzle his boss with spreadsheets and savings. Lorenzo prepared his study carefully. He positioned 2 chairs facing his desk, one for Vitor, one that would remain empty until the right moment. On his desk, he placed 3 items, his leather ledger, a file folder, and Clara's debt collection letter, face down. Then he waited. Vitor arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expensive suit. At 38, he was handsome in a slick way. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, the kind of man who smiled too much. He'd worked for Lorenzo for 5 years without a single complaint or error. The perfect employee. The perfect mask. Mr. DeLuca, Vitor said warmly, extending his hand. Good to see you. Lorenzo shook it, noting the firm grip, the confident eye contact. Vitor, thank you for coming. Please sit. Vitor settled into the chair, opening his briefcase. I brought the quarterly reports you requested. I think you'll be pleased with the numbers. We've really streamlined operations this year. Have we? Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Absolutely. I've implemented several cost-saving measures across the board. More efficient vendor contracts, better inventory management, strategic reduction in waste. Vitor pulled out a bound report and slid it across the desk. Our household operating costs are down 11% from last year. Lorenzo didn't touch the report. Impressive. I pride myself on fiscal responsibility, sir. Every dollar saved is a dollar that can be reinvested in your core operations. Vitor's smile widened. In fact, I've been meaning to discuss expanding my role. Perhaps overseeing some of your business holdings beyond just household accounts. I believe I could. Tell me about the maintenance deductions, Lorenzo interrupted. Vitor didn't miss a beat.
Ah, yes.
Those are part of the cost-saving measures I mentioned. Standard practice in facility management. When staff damage property or supplies, they reimburse the household. It's in their employment contracts. I see. And how often does this happen? Not often. Maybe 10 to 15 incidents per quarter. Broken dishes, damaged linens, that sort of thing. Small amounts, really. Vitor waved his hand dismissively. But it adds up over time. In the past year alone, we've recovered nearly $16,000 in damages. Lorenzo noted the lie. 16,000. Not the 8,000 he'd found. Vitor was inflating the numbers, probably to explain discrepancies, if they were ever discovered. And where does that recovered money go? Lorenzo asked mildly. Back into the household operating budget, of course. It's all documented in the quarterly reports. Of course, Lorenzo opened his ledger, turning pages slowly. I've been reviewing our staffing. Clara Moretti, she's been with us 8 months now. How would you assess her performance? The question seemed to surprise Vitor. Clara?
She's
adequate.
does her job. No complaints.
Just adequate. Well, she's a housemaid, sir. Not exactly a position requiring exceptional talent. Vitor's tone carried a hint of condescension that made Lorenzo's jaw tighten. Interesting. Mrs. Patterson tells me Clara is one of our hardest workers. Never late, never sick, volunteers for extra shifts. If you say so, sir. At that moment, right on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Come in, Lorenzo called. The door opened and Clara entered, carrying a silver tray with a coffee service. She kept her eyes down, moving quietly. Your coffee, Mr. DeLuca. And for your guest. Thank you, Clara. Just set it on the table there. Lorenzo watched Vitor carefully. The accountant's easy smile remained in place, but something flickered in his eyes when Clara entered. His right hand, resting on the arm of his chair, twitched just once, fingers curling into a fist before relaxing again. Recognition. And anxiety. Clara poured the coffee with practiced efficiency, then turned to leave. Clara, Lorenzo said. Wait a moment, please. Have a seat. She froze. Sir? Sit down. He gestured to the empty chair beside Vitor. Confusion and worry crossed her face, but she obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. Vitor shifted uncomfortably, putting a few more inches between them. Clara works very hard for this household, Lorenzo said, his tone conversational. She sends most of her salary to her sick mother. Did you know that, Vitor? I know, sir. I don't typically inquire about staff personal lives. Of course not. But you do handle their salaries. You'd notice if someone was experiencing financial hardship, wouldn't you? Vitor's smile was starting to look strained. I suppose so, yes. Good. Because I believe our staff should feel secure. They should know that when they work for me, they're protected. They're valued. Don't you agree? Absolutely, Mr. DeLuca. Of course. Good. Lorenzo's voice remained mild, almost pleasant. Then you won't mind explaining this security breach. He picked up the debt collection letter and slid it across the desk, placing it directly in front of Vitor. The accountant's eyes dropped to the letter. For just a moment, less than a second, his mask slipped. Lorenzo saw fear flash across his face, saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. Then the smile returned, but it was wrong now. Too tight. Too forced. I'm not sure what this is, Vitor said carefully. It's a debt collection notice. From a company called Moretti Medical Solutions. They're demanding $47,000 from Clara for her mother's medical care. Lorenzo leaned forward. The interesting thing is, Vitor, I had my people look into this company. It doesn't exist. No actual medical facility. No licensed doctors. Just A.P. O box in Newark. Clara gasped softly. What? The even more interesting thing, Lorenzo continued, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is that Moretti Medical Solutions is owned by Triton Logistics. And Triton Logistics is owned by the Moretti Syndicate. The same syndicate that's been trying to undermine my operations for 2 years. Vitor's face had gone pale. Sir, I don't know anything about. Don't. Lorenzo's voice cracked like a whip. Don't insult my intelligence by lying. The room fell silent. Clara looked between them, her face white with shock. Vitor's hands were shaking now, all pretense of confidence gone. This company, Lorenzo tapped the letter, sent fraudulent bills to Clara. Bills for services her mother never received. They've stolen $6,000 from her over 6 months. From a woman who can barely afford to eat. He leaned back, studying Vitor with cold eyes. Now, you're going to tell me you had nothing to do with this. That it's just coincidence your payroll deduction started the exact same month this fake company began billing my staff. Vitor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mr. DeLuca, I can explain. Then explain. But choose your words very carefully, Vitor. Because the next thing you say will determine whether you walk out of this house or get carried out. Vitor's eyes darted to the door, calculating distances, chances of escape. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. I wouldn't, Lorenzo said softly, and Vitor froze. Whatever you're reaching for, leave it where it is. Beside him, Clara was trembling. The debt. It's not real? My mother doesn't owe that money. Lorenzo's expression softened slightly when he looked at her.
No, Clara.
It was a lie.
A con.
They targeted you specifically, he turned back to Vitor. Didn't they? Vitor's breathing had gone rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. They came to me. They said if I didn't cooperate they'd. He stopped abruptly, realizing he'd just confessed. Lorenzo smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Keep talking, Vitor. Tell me everything. And maybe, just maybe, you'll live to see tomorrow. Vitor's confession came in fragments, desperate and disjointed. It was 2 years ago. Danny Moretti approached me at a restaurant. Said they knew about some indiscretions. Money I'd moved for another client. Things that weren't exactly legal. His voice shook. He said I could work with them or go to prison. What choice did I have? You had the choice to come to me, Lorenzo said coldly. And say what? That I'd been skimming from the Genovese family before I worked for you? That I'd stolen from previous employers? Vitor laughed bitterly. You would have killed me. I still might. Vitor flinched. They started small. Just wanted access to your payroll system. Said they'd insert some deductions, nothing major. I figured it was better than prison or a bullet. Then they expanded. Wanted names and addresses of your staff. Contact information for their families. They said they were building a database for business opportunities. Business opportunities, Lorenzo repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. They were building a targeting list. Finding the most vulnerable people in my organization and bleeding them dry. I didn't know they'd go that far. I swear, Mr. DeLuca. I thought it was just the payroll thing. When I found out about the fake medical bills, the fraudulent loans, he looked at Clara, genuine regret in his eyes.
I'm sorry.
I really am. But I was trapped. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You stole from me. You stole from my mother. She cried when those bills came. She thought she was going to die and leave me drowning in debt. Her voice broke. I skipped meals so I could send you people money. I walked miles in the rain to save bus fare. And you're sorry? Clara, Get out, she said, her voice stronger now. Get out before I forget that Mr. DeLuca needs you alive. Lorenzo almost smiled. Almost. Sit down, Clara. We're not done. She sat, but her hands were clenched into fists, knuckles white. Lorenzo turned back to Vitor. How many people know about this operation? Names. I only dealt with Danny Moretti. He's Vincent's nephew, runs the day-to-day operations for Triton. I'd send him the staff information, and he'd handle the rest. I swear I don't know anyone else. How did you communicate? Encrypted messages mostly. Sometimes phone calls. Vitor's hand moved unconsciously toward his jacket pocket again. He gave me a number to call if there was ever an emergency. An emergency, Lorenzo repeated. Like your boss finding out you're a traitor? Vitor said nothing, but his eyes confirmed it. Lorenzo stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. Outside, his estate stretched out peacefully. Perfectly maintained lawns, gardens, the long driveway lined with oak trees. It looked serene. Safe. But he'd just discovered an enemy had been living in his house for 5 years, rotting the foundation from within. Vitor, he said quietly, not turning around. I'm going to give you a choice. Call Danny Moretti. Tell him I'm getting suspicious. Tell him you need to meet urgently to discuss next steps. Do this, and you might survive the week. And if I don't, then I'll have Marco dig into every account you've ever touched, every transaction you've ever made. By tomorrow morning, I'll know about every law you've broken, every person you've betrayed, every dollar you've stolen. And then I'll gift wrap that evidence and send it to the FBI and every crime family you've ever wronged. Lorenzo finally turned, his face expressionless. You'll be dead within 48 hours, and I won't have to lift a finger. Vitor's face had gone gray. His hand trembled as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a burner phone. What do I say exactly? Improvise. Just make sure he believes you. And Vitor. Lorenzo's smile was razor-sharp. If you try to warn him about this conversation, I'll know. And the last thing you see in this life will be my face. Vitor nodded jerkily and dialed with shaking fingers. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. It's me, Vitor said, his voice strained. We have a problem. DeLuca's asking questions about the payroll deductions. He's looking at the numbers too closely.
A pause.
Lorenzo couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but he watched Vitor's face carefully. I don't know. He's suspicious. Called me in for a meeting, started asking about maintenance fees, wanted to see documentation. Vitor's eyes flicked to Lorenzo. I covered, but I think he's going to dig deeper. We need to meet. Tonight. Figure out how to shut this down before. Another pause. Longer this time. No, I can handle him.
I just need to know what the plan is.
Do we pull out? Erase the records? Vitor's voice rose slightly. Danny, I've been loyal for 2 years. I've given you everything you asked for. Now I need you to tell me what to do. Whatever Danny said next made Vitor relax slightly. Okay.
Yeah.
The usual place at midnight. I'll bring everything I have.
Just.
Be ready to move fast if this goes south. He ended the call and looked at Lorenzo. He wants to meet at a warehouse in Newark. Pier 17. Midnight. Good. Lorenzo picked up his desk phone and pressed a button. You can come in now. The study door opened and Marco entered, holding a laptop. He'd been in the next room the entire time, listening through the thin wall. Got it, Marco said, not looking at Vitor. The call pinged off a cell tower in Jersey City. I'm tracing the device now. Should have a location in about 2 hours. Vitor's face went from gray to white. You traced, you were listening. Did you really think I'd let you make a call without insurance? Lorenzo asked. Marco, what else? Marco's fingers flew across his keyboard. Already sent the signal. Our partners in the Cayman Islands are freezing Alpine's accounts as we speak. North Point and Triton's offshore holdings should be locked down within the hour. He looked up, grinning. By tomorrow morning, the Morettis will wake up to find about $12 million inaccessible. $12 million. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. They've been busier than we thought. Turns out they've been running this scam on at least 40 different organizations. Crime families, legitimate businesses, anyone they could infiltrate. Marco's expression darkened. They were building an empire on stolen pennies. Vitor stood suddenly. You used me. This was all a setup. Yes, Lorenzo said simply. Did you really think I discovered everything yesterday? I've known for a week, Vitor. I've been watching you, building evidence, waiting for the right moment, he gestured to Marco. Every call you've made, every email you've sent, every transaction you've processed, we have it all. You were dead the moment you accepted that first payment from Danny Moretti. You just didn't know it yet. So, what happens now? Vitor asked, his voice hollow.
Now?
You go pack a bag. Take only what you need. Be out of this house within the hour. Lorenzo's voice was ice. After that, I suggest you run. Very far, very fast. Because when Danny Moretti realizes his accounts are frozen and his operation is compromised, he's going to know someone talked. And he's going to come looking. You're setting me up to be killed.
No.
I'm giving you a chance to disappear, which is more than you gave Clara, or any of the other people you helped rob. Lorenzo moved closer, his voice dropping. But if I ever hear your name again, if you ever surface anywhere near my territory, I won't need to kill you. I'll just let the Morettis know exactly where you are. Vitor stared at him for a long moment, then turned and nearly ran from the room. Marco watched him go. Think he'll actually run? He'll try. Whether he makes it is another question. Lorenzo returned to his desk. How long until the Morettis realize what's happened? Their automated systems should start flagging frozen accounts around 6 a.m. By dawn, they'll know they've been hit. Lorenzo checked his watch.
11 Uhr morgens.
That gave him 19 hours.
Good.
That's plenty of time. Time for what? Lorenzo smiled, a real smile this time, full of cold anticipation. To prepare the next phase. The Morettis think freezing their accounts is my revenge. They're wrong. That's just the opening move. Clara, who'd been silent through the whole exchange, finally spoke. Mr. DeLuca?
The debt.
It's really gone. He looked at her, and his expression softened. It never existed, Clara. None of it was real. You don't owe anyone anything. She started crying, quiet tears of relief this time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Lorenzo said. Thank me when this is over. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Lorenzo was already awake, sitting in his study with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over his estate. He'd barely slept. When his encrypted phone buzzed, he knew exactly what it meant. They know, Marco said without greeting. How bad? 12.3 million frozen across 14 accounts. Their offshore partners are panicking. Vincent Moretti's been on the phone for the past hour screaming at bankers who can't tell him why his money suddenly became inaccessible. Marco's voice held dark satisfaction. It gets better. 3 of their legitimate business investors just pulled out. When money disappears like this, people assume FBI involvement. Nobody wants to be near that. Lorenzo allowed himself a small smile. And the other thing. Already in motion. The health inspector should be arriving at their Newark warehouse in about 20 minutes. Perfect. Lorenzo ended the call and turned to his computer. On the screen were live traffic camera feeds, not official ones, but the kind Marco could access through less than legal channels. One camera had a clear view of Pier 17, where Triton Logistics operated their main shipping hub. At 7:15 a.m., a convoy of official vehicles pulled up to the warehouse gates. Health and Safety Department, Department of Labor, Office of Weights and Measures, even a fire marshal's truck. Lorenzo had made 5 phone calls the previous afternoon. Not threats, not bribes, just information shared between concerned citizens and city officials. Information about potential safety violations at a shipping facility. Anonymous tips about possible labor law infractions. Concerns about improper handling of hazardous materials. In Lorenzo's world, violence was sometimes necessary. But he'd learned that a well-placed regulatory audit could be far more devastating than a bullet. Bullets made martyrs. Bureaucracy made examples. He watched the screen as inspectors swarmed the warehouse. Workers were stopped mid-task. Forklifts went still. Shipping containers sat unopened as officials with clipboards examined every inch of the operation. His phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Lorenzo answered. DeLuca. The voice was tight with barely controlled rage. This is Vincent Moretti. Vincent. It's been a while. Cut the bullshit. I know this is you. The frozen accounts, the inspections. You think I'm stupid? I think you're a thief, Lorenzo said calmly. I think you've been stealing from my people for 2 years. I think you targeted a young woman whose only crime was having your last name and a sick mother. And I think you made the mistake of believing I wouldn't notice. Silence on the other end. Then, you can't prove anything. Can't I? Let's see. Alpine Facility Services, your shell company. North Point Holdings. Triton Logistics. Moretti Medical Solutions. Should I keep going? I have documents, Vincent. Bank records. Encrypted messages. Even recorded phone calls from your nephew Danny explaining the whole operation. Lorenzo's voice hardened. I can prove everything. If you had real evidence, you have gone to the cops. Who said I haven't? Lorenzo let that hang in the air for a moment. But honestly, Vincent, I don't need the cops. I don't need violence. I don't need to spill a single drop of blood. All I need to do is let the city of Newark know that Triton Logistics has some serious compliance issues. You bastard. Those inspections will shut us down for weeks. We have contracts, shipments, obligations. You should have thought of that before you stole from me. This isn't over, DeLuca. You freeze my money. I'll burn your operations to the ground. Try it, Lorenzo said softly. Please try it. Because I've been very careful so far, Vincent. Very measured. But if you escalate, if you come at me directly,
He paused.
I'll stop being polite. And you'll discover exactly what happens when you push a DeLuca too far. He hung up before Vincent could respond. By noon, the damage reports were rolling in. Marco sat across from Lorenzo in the study, reading from his laptop. Newark warehouse, shut down pending safety inspection. They found significant violations in electrical systems, fire suppression, and hazardous material storage. Estimated downtime, 2 to 3 weeks. How convenient, Lorenzo murmured. Elizabeth facility, Labor Department found payroll irregularities. Seems Triton was paying workers off the books, violating minimum wage laws. They're facing fines and a full audit. Terrible luck. Jersey City Distribution Center, Weights and Measures found 3 shipping containers with misreported contents. Customs is now flagging every Triton shipment for secondary inspection. Marco looked up, grinning. That's the really beautiful part. Every delay costs them money. Every inspection means missed deliveries. Every missed delivery means breach of contract. They're hemorrhaging cash with every hour that passes. Lorenzo stood and walked to his wall map. He picked up several blue pins, the ones marking Moretti territory, and studied them thoughtfully. What about their investors?
Spooked.
For major clients have already suspended contracts pending. Investigation of business practices. 2 more are in talks with your shipping company about switching providers. Marco's smile widened. By the end of the week, Triton will have lost approximately 30% of their legitimate business. And the illegitimate business. Also suffering. Word on the street is Vincent can't cover his obligations. When you can't pay your people stop working. His protection rackets are unraveling. His distribution networks are stalling. 3 of his loan sharking operations just got raided. Anonymous tips to the police about illegal lending practices. Lorenzo replaced the blue pins, then added a red pin to Newark, another to Elizabeth, a third to Jersey City. His territory, expanding into the vacuum left by the Moretus collapse. You know what I love about this? Marco said. Vincent can't retaliate. If he comes at you with violence, he looks desperate and draws more attention. If he does nothing, he looks weak and loses more ground. Either way, he's finished. Not finished, Lorenzo corrected. Wounded. There's a difference. What's next then? Lorenzo returned to his desk and pulled out his black notebook. He flipped through pages of notes, observations, connections. Everything he'd gathered over the past 2 weeks. Now we wait, he said. We let the city finish its inspections. We let Vincent's investors abandon him. We let his empire crumble under the weight of its own corruption. He looked up at Marco. And when he's desperate, when he's grasping for any way to survive, that's when we take everything else. Marco studied his friend carefully. This isn't just about the money, is it? Or even about the theft? No, Lorenzo admitted. It's about Clara sitting in the rain, eating scraps, crying over debt that didn't exist. It's about every other person like her, people trying to survive, trying to help their families, being bled dry by parasites like Vincent Moretti. His voice went cold. It's about sending a message that some people are under my protection. And anyone who touches them answers to me. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You just started a war you can't win. Lorenzo showed it to Marco, who laughed. Vincent. Probably Danny. Vincent's too proud to make threats by text. Lorenzo deleted the message. Let them threaten. Let them rage. Let them watch their world collapse around them. He walked to the window and looked out at his estate. Somewhere in this house, Clara was working, finally free from the weight of false debt, finally able to breathe. That alone made everything worth it. You know what they say about storms, Marco? What's that? Lorenzo smiled, a genuine smile this time, touched with something almost peaceful. Sometimes storms clean more than dust. Sometimes they wash away rot and leave room for something better to grow. Outside, the sky was clear and blue. Perfect weather. But in Newark, Vincent Moretti's empire was drowning in a storm of Lorenzo's making. And the rain had only just begun. Clara noticed the changes slowly, like watching winter fade into spring. The first thing was Vitor's absence. One day he was there, hovering around the accounting office with his perfect smile and expensive cologne. The next day, gone. His office was empty, his computer removed, his nameplate taken off the door. Business elsewhere, Mrs. Patterson said curtly when Clara asked. Mr. DeLuca will hire a replacement. But there was something in the head housekeeper's tone, something that suggested Vitor's departure hadn't been voluntary or pleasant. The second thing was her paycheck. Clara opened the envelope Friday morning and stared at the number. It was wrong. Too high. She counted twice, then 3 times, certain there'd been a mistake.
No deductions.
Not a single one. And her base salary had increased by $600. She went straight to Mrs. Patterson's office. There's an error in my pay. Mrs. Patterson looked up from her computer, reading glasses perched on her nose. No error. Mr. DeLuca reviewed all staff compensation. Yours was adjusted. Adjusted? You've been here 8 months, Clara. You work more hours than anyone else, you never complain, and you do excellent work. Mr. DeLuca believes in rewarding loyalty. She returned her attention to the screen, signaling the conversation was over. Consider it a well-earned raise. Clara walked away in a daze. The extra money meant she could actually save something. Maybe even afford to visit her mother, who was living with Clara's aunt in Pennsylvania now, recovering well. Which brought her to the third strange thing. 2 weeks ago, a home health aide had shown up at her mother's door. Professional, certified, with references and a kind smile. She came 3 times a week to check vitals, manage medications, help with physical therapy. When Clara called her mother, frantic with worry about the cost, her mother had been equally confused. The agency said it was covered by some charity program. Something about medical debt forgiveness for families affected by. I don't remember exactly. The paperwork was complicated, sweetie, but they said it was all taken care of. Clara had cried on the phone, relief flooding through her. Then she'd wondered, what charity program? How did they find her mother? Why were they helping? She hadn't found answers. But she'd found other things. Groceries started appearing outside her small apartment door, always on Wednesday evenings when she worked late.
Good food.
Fresh vegetables, quality meat, bread from the Italian bakery she'd mentioned once, months ago, in passing to another maid. Nothing extravagant, but enough to ensure she wasn't eating scraps anymore. No note.
No explanation.
Just a bag of groceries every week. Then there was the doctor visit. Her apartment building manager had knocked on her door one evening, saying a community health program was offering free checkups to residents. The doctor who examined her was professional, thorough. He prescribed physical therapy for her knee, the injury from a fall down the mansion's back stairs 3 months ago, an injury she'd hidden because she couldn't afford to take time off. No charge, the doctor had said, handing her a referral. The program covers everything. What program? Clara had wanted to ask, but she'd been too grateful to question it. She wasn't stupid. All these kindnesses, all these coincidences, they pointed to one person. But every time she tried to approach Lorenzo to thank him, to ask if he was behind all this, the words died in her throat. He was her employer, a powerful man in a dangerous world. The kind of man who could destroy lives with a phone call. Why would he care about her? But then she'd remember that night in the rain. The gentleness in his voice when he'd ordered her to eat. The way he'd looked at her, not like a maid, but like a person who mattered. You should have eaten that instead. Clara stood in the mansion's hallway one evening, after most of the staff had gone home, thinking about all of it. The disappearance of Vitor. The miraculous resolution of her mother's debt. The raises, the groceries, the healthcare. The pieces fit together too perfectly to be coincidence. She walked toward Lorenzo's study, determined to finally confront him, to demand the truth. But as she approached, she heard voices, Lorenzo and Marco, talking in low, serious tones about shipping routes and territory disputes. Business. Dangerous business. Clara turned away. Whatever Lorenzo was, whatever he'd done for her, he was still a man with enemies. A man who lived in shadows. She couldn't just barge in and disrupt that world. She headed toward the staff quarters instead. Her shift was over. Time to go home. But when she reached her locker, something stopped her. A coat. Folded carefully, placed on the bench outside the locker room. Not just any coat, Lorenzo's coat. The expensive black wool one he'd been wearing that night in the rain. The one he'd draped over her shoulders when she'd been shivering, though she'd been too overwhelmed to remember until now. Clara picked it up with trembling hands. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, something subtle and expensive. She ran her fingers over the soft fabric, remembering the weight of it on her shoulders, the unexpected kindness of the gesture. There was something in the pocket. She reached in and pulled out a plain white envelope. Her name was written on the front in neat handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. Clara, the debt was never real. The companies that build you don't exist. You owe nothing to anyone. Your raise is permanent. Your mother's health care will continue as long as she needs it. These aren't gifts, they're corrections. You were always entitled to fair treatment. Someone just forgot to provide it. The coat is yours to keep. You needed it more than I did that night. You don't owe me thanks. You don't owe me anything. But if you ever need help, real help, my door is always open. Clara read it twice, then 3 times. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. He hadn't signed it with his full name, just L, as if he were giving her the choice to acknowledge what he'd done or to pretend she'd never known. She looked at the code in her hands, thought about refusing it, about maintaining professional distance, about not accepting charity. Then she thought about sitting in the rain, hungry and hopeless, convinced the world had forgotten people like her existed.
Lorenzo de Luca hadn't forgotten.
He'd seen her, really seen her, and he'd decided she deserved better. Clara folded the coat carefully and draped it over her arm. She tucked the letter into her pocket, close to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty hallway, knowing he wouldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. She walked toward the exit, but paused at the doorway to Lorenzo's study. The light was still on, shadows moving behind the frosted glass. She raised her hand to knock, then lowered it. Not tonight. Tonight, she'd just accept the gift. Tomorrow, or someday soon, she'd find the words to tell him what his kindness meant. How it had saved her when she'd been drowning. How it had reminded her that good people still existed, even in dark places. Clara pulled on the coat. It was too big, drowning her small frame, but it was warm, safe. She walked out into the November night, protected from the cold for the first time in months, and finally, she felt like she could breathe. Behind her, in his study, Lorenzo watched from the window as she disappeared down the driveway. He said nothing, did nothing, just watched until she was safely out of sight. Marco appeared beside him. "She found the coat." "She did. You know she's going to figure out it was all you, right? The healthcare, the groceries, everything." Lorenzo smiled faintly. "I know. And that doesn't worry you?" "Why would it?" Marco studied his friend carefully. "Because in our world, caring about someone makes them a target." Lorenzo's smile faded.
He'd thought about that.
Spent sleepless nights weighing the risks. But when he'd seen Clara walk away wearing his coat, finally free from the weight of false debt and manufactured suffering, he'd known the truth. Some things were worth the risk. "Then I'll make sure she stays protected," Lorenzo said quietly. "No one touches her. Ever." The invitation appeared on the staff bulletin board Monday morning, typed on Lorenzo's personal letterhead. Staff Appreciation Dinner. Friday, 7 p.m. Main dining room. Attendance mandatory. Formal attire. The household erupted in whispers. In the 8 years Mrs. Patterson had managed the De Luca estate, there had never been a formal staff dinner. Mr. De Luca wasn't that kind of employer. He paid well, treated people fairly, but he maintained distance. You did your job, got your paycheck, went home. That was the arrangement. So why now? "Probably announcing layoffs," muttered David Chun, the gardener, over lunch. "Rich people don't throw dinners unless they're about to drop bad news." "Or he's selling the estate," Maria Santos suggested nervously. "Moving somewhere else." Clara said nothing. She'd been quiet all week, ever since finding the coat and the letter. She tried 3 times to thank Lorenzo, but each time she'd approached his study, her courage had failed. How did you thank someone for saving your life without making it awkward? Without crossing invisible lines between employer and employee? Friday arrived with unusual tension. The staff showered and changed in the quarters, helping each other with ties and zippers. Clara wore her only formal dress, a simple navy blue piece she'd bought at Goodwill 2 years ago for a cousin's wedding. It was outdated and fit poorly, but it was all she had. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, carrying a garment bag. "Clara?" "A moment." Clara followed her to the private office. Mrs. Patterson unzipped the bag, revealing a stunning emerald green dress. Elegant, sophisticated, clearly expensive. I don't understand," Clara stammered. "Mr. De Luca sent this. Said your current dress was lovely, but that you deserved something special." Mrs. Patterson's stern expression softened slightly. "He has good taste, I'll give him that. It should fit you perfectly." Clara touched the fabric with trembling fingers.
"Silk.
Real silk. I can't accept this." "You can and you will." When Mr. DeLuca gives an order, we follow it, but there was something almost motherly in Mrs. Patterson's tone. Put it on, child. Let me see. 10 minutes later, Clara stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress fit like it had been made for her, because it probably had been. It brought out the color of her eyes, made her look elegant instead of exhausted. Beautiful, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. Now come. It's time. The main dining room had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers blazed with light. The long mahogany table was set with fine china and silver. Fresh flowers, roses and lilies, filled the room with subtle fragrance. At the head of the table sat Lorenzo, wearing a dark suit, looking every inch the powerful man he was. 22 staff members filed in nervously. Most had never eaten in this room. Some had cleaned it 1,000 times, but never imagined sitting here. Please, everyone sit, Lorenzo said, gesturing to the table. They scrambled for chairs, following unspoken hierarchies. Mrs. Patterson near the head of the table, senior staff next, junior staff toward the far end. Clara moved toward the corner, instinctively taking the least prominent seat. Clara. She froze. Everyone looked at her. Lorenzo stood and pulled out the chair directly to his right, the seat of honor. Here, please. Sir, that's not appropriate. I'm just. Clara, his voice was gentle but firm. Sit down. Every eye in the room watched as she walked the length of the table, feeling her face burn with embarrassment. She lowered herself into the chair beside him, acutely aware of the expensive dress, the confused stares, the impropriety of it all. Lorenzo remained standing. He picked up his wine glass and surveyed the table. The room fell silent. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, he began. I know this is unusual. I'm not known for grand gestures or emotional speeches. But something happened recently that made me realize I needed to say some things. Things that are long overdue. He paused, choosing his words carefully. This house runs because of you. Every meal, every clean room, every maintained garden, every moment of security. It exists because you show up every day and do your jobs with dignity and skill. I've taken that for granted. I've treated you fairly, paid you well, but I haven't truly valued you the way I should. Some of the staff exchanged glances. Where was this going? A few weeks ago, I found Clara sitting outside in a storm, eating bread crusts and crying. His voice dropped. She was going hungry because she was sending her salary to her sick mother. She was hiding an injury because she couldn't afford to take time off. And she was drowning in debt that, he paused, his jaw tightening. That wasn't even real. Gasps around the table. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Someone was stealing from her. From many of you, actually. Taking money you'd earned, money your families needed, and I didn't notice. I was so focused on bigger things, territory disputes, business deals, external threats, that I missed the enemy inside my own house. Lorenzo looked at Clara, and his expression softened in a way few had ever seen. When I found you that night, Clara, I realized this house had forgotten what loyalty looks like. What real dedication means. You reminded it. You reminded me. He turned back to the table. You all remind me every day. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say it properly. He raised his glass. To loyalty. To dignity. To people who show up every day and make the world work while the rest of us take credit. To loyalty, the staff echoed, raising their own glasses, voices thick with emotion. Mrs. Patterson was crying silently, tears streaming down her weathered face. David Chun wiped his eyes roughly with his napkin. Maria Santos clutched her chest, overwhelmed. As they drank, Lorenzo sat down beside Clara. Under the table, away from everyone's view, she felt him squeeze her hand gently, just once, just for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. No, Clara, he replied quietly. Thank you. The dinner that followed was unlike anything the staff had experienced. Real conversation, laughter, stories shared across the table regardless of rank or position. Lorenzo asked about their families, their lives outside these walls, their dreams. When dessert arrived, tiramisu from the best Italian bakery in the city, Lorenzo stood again. One more thing. Effective immediately, all previous maintenance deductions are being refunded. You'll see the money in next week's paycheck. Additionally, all salaries are being reviewed and adjusted to reflect your actual value to this household. He smiled slightly. And if anyone ever tries to steal from you again, from any of you, come to me directly. You're under my protection now. All of you. The applause started slowly, then built. Some staff members were openly crying. Others stood, clapping harder. Clara felt Lorenzo's hand on her shoulder, a gesture of both comfort and solidarity. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. These people were his, and anyone who touched them would answer to him. As the evening wound down and staff members began to leave, they stopped by Lorenzo's chair to thank him.
Some shook his hand.
Some could barely speak through their tears. Each one left with their dignity restored, their value acknowledged. Clara was the last to leave. She stood, smoothing her beautiful dress, wondering if she should say something profound or just slip away quietly. Lorenzo stood with her. The dress suits you. It's too much. All of this is too much. It's exactly enough. You deserve every bit of it. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why me? Why go to all this trouble? Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, studying her face. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because someone needed to, and because he paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. Because when I saw you in the rain, I saw my mother, working herself to death for people who never noticed, never cared. I couldn't help her, but I could help you. Clara's throat tightened. Your mother? She died when I was 17. Heart attack at 43, probably from exhaustion. His expression hardened briefly. She deserved better. You deserve better. Everyone at this table tonight deserves better. Without thinking, Clara reached out and took his hand. A bold gesture. An inappropriate gesture. But in that moment it felt right. She would be proud of you, Clara said. The man you've become. The way you protect people. Lorenzo smiled, genuinely smiled. I hope so. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, the distance between employer and employee disappearing into something else. Something neither of them could quite name. Word count, 1,000 words. Ready for section 12, the final section. The house grew quiet as the last of the staff departed. Their voices faded down the driveway, still animated with excitement and gratitude. Clara stood in the empty dining room, surrounded by the remnants of the evening, empty wine glasses catching the chandelier light, crumpled napkins, the lingering scent of flowers and good food. She should leave too. Go home. Sleep off this surreal evening. But her feet carried her elsewhere. The stone balcony where Lorenzo had found her that stormy night looked different now. Someone, probably Lorenzo himself, had strung small lanterns along the railing. They glowed warm and golden against the November darkness, casting dancing shadows on the stone steps. A blanket was draped over the bench. The space that had been cold and miserable was now inviting, almost magical. Clara sat on the steps where she'd sat before, but this time she wasn't shivering, wasn't crying, wasn't eating scraps and wondering how she'd survive another month. She pulled Lorenzo's coat, her coat now, tighter around her shoulders, and stared up at the stars. I thought you might come here. She turned. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, jacket off, tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Not the intimidating boss. Not the dangerous man who commanded empires.
Just a man.
I hope that's okay, Clara said. I wasn't ready to leave yet. This is your place too. More than most people's, I think. He gestured to the steps. May I? She nodded, and he sat beside her, in almost the exact spot where he'd sat that night in the rain. The night everything changed. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the lantern light flicker. Then Clara spoke, her voice soft. I don't know how to thank you properly. For everything. The dress, the dinner, my mother's health care, the debt, she laughed shakily. There aren't words big enough. Lorenzo shook his head. You don't need to thank me, Clara. Especially not for your mother. But you paid for everything. The home health aid, the medications, the physical therapy. I paid what the world owed you, he interrupted gently. You fed her for years with your work. Every hour you spent in this house, every sacrifice you made, every meal you skipped so you could send money home, you were already paying. I just made sure you got a fair return on that investment. Clara felt tears threatening again. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people don't see a lot of things. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Clara, you have to understand something. What happened to you, the theft, the fake debt, all of it, that wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve it. You don't owe the universe some kind of karmic debt because I decided to do the right thing. I know, but... Do you? His voice was gentle but probing. Because I've watched you these past weeks. Even after finding out the debt was fake, even after getting your raise, you still act like you're taking up too much space. Like you're not entitled to basic dignity. Clara looked down at her hands.
He was right.
Even now, sitting in this beautiful dress on these steps, part of her felt like an imposter. Like any moment someone would remember, she was just the maid and tell her to go back where she belonged. My whole life, people have told me to be grateful for what I have, she said quietly. To not ask for too much. To be happy with scraps because scraps are better than nothing. That's what people with power tell people without it. It's how they justify taking more than they deserve. Lorenzo's voice hardened slightly. But you know what I learned? Gratitude is good. But you should never be grateful for the bare minimum. You should never thank someone for treating you like a human being. That should be the standard, not the exception. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who lived in shadows, who made his living through violence and intimidation, somehow understood dignity better than most legitimate people she'd known. How did you become like this? She asked. Like what?
Good.
Despite everything. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. I'm not good, Clara. I've done things that would horrify you. Hurt people. Made choices I can't take back. He stared out at the dark garden. But my mother used to say that being powerful means nothing if you only use that power for yourself. She worked 3 jobs and still found time to help neighbors who had even less. She taught me that strength isn't about what you can take. It's about what you choose to protect. She sounds amazing. She was. And she would have liked you, he smiled slightly. She would have said you have good bones. That's what she called people with real character underneath everything else. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, not from the lanterns or the coat, but from something deeper. Connection. Understanding. The knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. A drop of water hit her hand. Then another.
Then.
But not like before. This wasn't a violent storm with thunder and fury. This was gentle rain, the kind that washes things clean without destruction. The kind that helps things grow. Lorenzo looked up at the sky, then at Clara. We should go inside. Should we? Clara heard herself ask. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Maybe not yet. So they sat there, side by side on the stone steps, as gentle rain began to fall around them. The lanterns flickered, but didn't go out. The night air smelled fresh and clean. Clara thought about that other night, just weeks ago, when she'd sat in these same steps crying and hungry, convinced the world had forgotten her. She'd been drowning then, pulled under by debt and exhaustion and hopelessness. Now she was floating. No, better than floating. She was standing on solid ground for the first time in years. Clara? Lorenzo's voice was soft. Yes. You're going to be okay. Your mother's going to be okay. I promise you that. She believed him. This man who kept his promises. This man who saw her when she was invisible to everyone else. I know, she said simply. They sat together as the rain fell, neither one moving to escape it. Because sometimes you need to get wet to feel clean. Sometimes you need storms to appreciate peace. Sometimes you need to sit in the darkness before you can really see the light. The night that had begun with hunger, with tears, with a girl eating bread in the rain, that night ended here. With dignity restored. With hope rekindled. With two people from different worlds finding common ground on stone steps under gentle rain and lantern light. And if Clara's hand found Lorenzo's in the darkness, and if his fingers curled around hers with quiet strength, and if they sat that way until the rain stopped and the stars came out, well, that was between them and the night. Some stories don't need tidy endings. Some stories just need moments like this. Moments when broken things begin to heal, when justice finds its way, when someone who is hungry finally gets fed. This was that moment.
And it was enough.
The end.